And welcome back to RGR, folks. We are lucky to get Matt Derrick back, and we got a few things to talk about. We covered some of it on the Locked On Chiefs podcast this week, but Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. A lot of changes. We talked about college on the show this week. We talked about how that rolls in, and one position in particular that I really want to dig into with you because it's already pretty young in a lot of spots, and this is something that's going to continue. But we got a little bit of extra information. Last week, we heard from Charvarius Ward about what he expects in terms of a suspension for Bashaud Breeland, which makes the cornerback group that much thinner. Are you in line with that? Is 4 games what your expectation is right now?
I mean, that's generally been, and it's hard to tell, whether, Ward actually knows something or whether he's just going off of, what's been reported. But it seems like he probably has a lot better sources than we do. So, yeah, I mean, that's consistent with what we've heard. So it would not surprise me in the least. And you're right. I mean, losing Rashad Breeland for 4 games, it takes a lot of starch out of that depth chart, and now means that you're going to be looking at some really young and inexperienced players early in the season.
Yeah, and that's not even – we'll get to the young guys, but in particular, with Bashaud out, what does that do to the starting lineup in your opinion? What particularly does it mean for Rashod Fenton?
Yeah, Fenton's an interesting case. I mean, because obviously I think it propels him into the starting lineup. I mean, we will see. I mean, there's still a lot of camp to go, and jobs can be won and lost. But I think you already had him penciled in as your number 3 corner as it was. Chiefs, since he arrived, I mean, they've really have, targeted him as being a future inside guy. I mean, they think that he's got that potential to cover the slot and can be that. We'll see how Steve Spagnuolo decides to deploy it. I mean, you will probably, I would guess, in maybe the first month of the season, see a Fenton maybe playing on the outside, but then when they do go to a 3-corner look, kicks inside. At the same time, I could also see them relying much more on some 3 and 4 safety looks. Maybe Tyrann Mathieu ends up playing a lot more of that slot. You leave Fenton on the outside, and maybe that's the look they go with because, we do know that based on the end of last year, I mean, Steve Spagnuolo really liked his multiple safety look. And so it wouldn't surprise me if you see a lot of those guys out there. But once again, then that brings into Juan Thornhill's, health, how that's going to play into it. But after Fenton, you got a lot of question marks. I mean, the Chiefs seem really high on Antonio Hamilton, who's coming over from the Giants and has typically been a special teams guy. Hasn't played a lot of defense, but they think that he can do it. The other guy I hear about from people inside the organization is Alex Brown, who was, active on the roster at the end of the season last year. A lot of speed, a guy from, I'm trying to remember where he went to college at, smaller school. So, it was South Carolina State. There you go. I should remember that.
They'll climb either way.
Yeah. So, I mean, they really thought, I mean, he kind of maybe fits into that Charvarius Ward category of a guy who was just maybe lower level of football, just needed some time to mature and develop and to grow a little bit. So there's a lot of people who are in the organization who are high on him. And then you got the rookies. I mean, L'Jarius Sneed certainly going to get a look. Bo Pete Keys, we will see. I mean, right now he's still on the NFI list. So what that situation is and when you're going to see him on the field, hard to say at this point. So there's a lot of depth and question marks. So you're going to see some young players early in the season, and in camp, they're going to have to, rotate those guys around a lot and see, which ones can do it and the good thing is that they're going against an offense in practice that's going to get them ready.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be the greatest prep. In fact, L'Jarius Sneed was asked about that in his presser last weekend.
I feel like, man, they're going to prepare me for anybody in the league. I feel like they one of the 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and I feel like they're going to prepare me, to be the best that I can be.
I thought while I have high hopes for L'Jarius, I like his fit. He was certainly a little overwhelmed, I think, being in front of the cameras, but he did seem very adamant that playing against this wide receiver group with Pat Mahomes is something that he feels is going to prepare him pretty well.
Yeah, and especially that group because, the way the practices are structured, it's typically 1s versus 2s. I mean, it's starters versus backups. So, that's the guys who see most of the action against the number 1 offense, and it's the guys who probably need the most experience. So, and like we said, I mean, you're going to see a lot of rotation. I mean, I think they're going to give – I think you probably have to give Breeland a lot of snaps in this camp while you can, because you know he's not going to have him for 4 weeks maybe. But the other guys you've got to, and if anybody who's gone to camp the last few years, I mean, Chiefs are not afraid. I mean, even Sagmola last year, not afraid to rotate guys through that cornerback spot.
Yeah. And I like where you went early about bringing Tyrann down into the slot, letting Fenton play outside. That's exactly what I want to do. I think that gives them the best combination. But like you said, it opens up what's at the background. First, do we know any detail about Bo Pete and what that injury is, and if we have a timeline, even roughly?
We don't. I mean, and unfortunately, the access has been so limited that it's not anything that you've been able to, really dig into. And the Chiefs are always guarded with injuries as well. I mean, I've told it's nothing serious. So it's nothing significant. But then again, I mean, you never know the gamesmanship that NFL teams can play. And hey, this is kind of one of those things that you can play with. And remember too, I mean, as Bo Pete was really kind of, even though we're treating him as a draft pick, I mean, he was really going to be an undrafted guy most likely. Mm-hmm. And the Chiefs saw him as somebody that they wanted as a priority free agent, knew they weren't going to be able to sign because there were other teams out there ready and willing and able to throw more money at him. And that's why they went to go get him. So, you treat him like a draft pick, but at the same time, because of his history and with the experience that he's got, I mean, he fits into that more undrafted category. So, hey, does he have a very minor injury that the Chiefs are using as a way to be able to squeeze him on injured reserve and basically redshirt him this year? I don't put that past NFL teams because they've done it before.
Especially this one.
we don't know. So don't take that. Don't want anybody to hear that and say that I'm saying that about Bo Pete. But given his background and knowing, what the Chiefs, think of him, and that they definitely see there's a lot more upside down the road, I mean, there's still a million different ways that could go.
Yeah. Between Alex Brown and Hamilton, that gives you depth to 5, right? So let me boil it down to this. Do you think either Bo Pete doesn't go to IR and makes this roster the 53, or do you think Lavert Hill is probably the next guy down the list? You think either of them could actually be on game roster day one?
Yeah, you could see, because, I mean, it would not be out of character for this team to likely maybe carry 10 defensive backs on the opening roster, 5 corners and 5 safeties. And if Rashad Breeland's not going to be one of those, then yeah, I mean, right now, between Ward, Fenton, Hamilton, Brown, you're 4 there. You're going to have a 5th. I mean, well, Sneed would probably guess to be the 5th there. And that's assuming you don't have any injuries, which, this team, unfortunately, in the defensive backfield the last few years has had that. So you can't expect that you're going to go into the season with what you got right now. I think they at least feel like they've got numbers, even if they are young, and know that they are just, one injury away from putting some really young guys in there. But they've gone with their tried and true method, which is, go for young guys with a lot of speed, a lot of length, that, they feel like they can maybe game plan around a little bit, especially when you got a guy like Tyrann Mathieu in the secondary. You build it around him, and, because the focus of this team is not the corners. Focuses the defensive backfields, the safeties.
Well, and that brings me to them. Like we talked about, especially if Tyrann drops down into the slot, they're very comfortable with Dan. Even asking Dan to play free in space, which I don't think is his strength, but they're certainly comfortable with it enough. But the question is, Andy addressed that Juan is coming along, making progress, but obviously not ready. And that was never the expectation for me or I think anybody else who realized how that progression was going to go. So in the next couple of weeks, do we expect to see Armani Watts take those snaps? Do we expect somebody else to step into that role? Or do you think that they might have to just go with Sorensen and Tyrann?
Yeah, the addition of Tedrick Thompson really kind of piques my interest, because it makes you wonder, I mean, is that because they do think that, Thornhill is, maybe not 100% ready and maybe it's going to take a little bit longer than we expected? Or is that just maybe a little bit of insurance back there? And especially because you just don't know what you have with Armani Watts yet, because he hasn't had that kind of breakthrough yet. Everything I've heard says that, Thornhill is absolutely on target and was a prospect for maybe beginning camp at 100%, but they were very interested in making sure they didn't rush him too quickly. I think he's going to be ready for week 1. I mean, that's every indication I get is that he will be there. Okay. So if you don't see Juan Thornhill off of the PUP list in the next week or 2, I'd be probably a little surprised. So as long as there aren't any setbacks, I think he will be there. But Yeah, I mean, the addition of Thompson, I think, does raise some question marks, even though, hey, if you got a veteran guy that you can bring in, that's great at this time, especially this time of the season. But it does make you wonder about, where you are depth-wise and health-wise with Thornhill and where you are development-wise with Watts.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot of watching that we're going to have to do just to see how they come along. This is definitely, I think, the most volatile position on the defense. Would you agree with that?
Probably so. Linebacker's a little thin, but I think you probably could tell who's going to be the guys who make the squad from there. Defensive line is actually pretty deep, at least what the Chiefs are comfortable with. So that might be the position where maybe there's a surprise cut or two. But yeah, I mean, the defensive backfield, especially just because you don't know the status of a couple of your starters with, Breland and Thornhill. Mm-hmm. A lot of different things can happen. And no, I mean, at this point, I could probably only say with certainty, a handful of guys that I would say absolutely will be making this squad. I mean, and then I think maybe the bottom 3 or 4 spots are up for grabs.
It's in flux, and everything that we know, folks, Matt will put on Chiefs Digest, and I'll put for you here, and we'll come together as often as we can. Thanks for all the time, Matt.
Thanks, Ryan. Good talking to you.
All right. Have a good one, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.